welcome back, listeners, to another interesting episode of the Pleasure Principles podcast, the space where sensuality meets emotional intelligence and we get curious about what it really takes to build deep, fulfilling connections. I'm your host, Sana, and today's episode, listeners, invites all of us into a very rich conversation about desire, not just what we want, but how wanting itself helps us come alive. And to help me with this conversation is the incredible Aubrey Aust. She's a researcher, writer, and MA candidate at NYU, where her work bridges relational psychology, somatic theory, and philosophy. Now, let me share a bit about Aubrey with all of you listeners. She dives into the questions many of us feel, but we rarely articulate, like what makes intimacy possible? Or how do we create that relational safety or that safe spaces within us? And how does desire shape not only our pleasure, but our very sense of self? And in today's conversation, we'll be diving deep into the evolution of desire as a site of identity creation, formation, and how kink can become a conscious framework for trust, and why tuning into the body unlocks deeper, profound, intentional connection. So, wherever you are, just take a breath, drop into your body, and get ready for a powerful exploration that bridges our mind, body, and soul. So, Aubrey, welcome to the show, and it is such an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here.
Okay, Aubrey, absolutely interesting topic. It's always the more we try to know, the more we try to get deeper, the more facts and the more realizations. Oh my goodness, that is what it is. Such kind of moments they keep on coming, especially in desire or sensuality. So, talking about your work, Aubrey, you beautifully bridge psychology, then there is somatic theory and philosophy. So, how exactly all these three things, all these worlds intersect, when it comes to intimacy and the ever evolving sense of self?
Absolutely. My background actually began in political theory. I was really drawn to the question of how power and desire structure our lives, both collectively and privately. And then over time, I realized these are not simply political forces at play. There's something deeply personal to this. And so that's what kind of got me into the realm of psychology initially. I started studying that desire isn't something that we just feel in isolation. It's absolutely shaped by our histories, by our attachments, and by our nervous systems, and has a pivotal role in creating our sense of self. So, in my current graduate work, I'm studying relational psychology and philosophy, focusing on how we build that relational safety and how that safety allows desire, intimacy, and ultimately presence to flourish with the other. And everything comes down to how we interact relationally. So I'm studying everything from attachment theory, somatic psychology, the ethics of care to understand what makes us feel really alive, connected, empowered in our relationships. And I think it's so powerful to look at this from a psychological lens because desire is often misunderstood. Sometimes we see it strictly as impulse, but there are so many more deeper layers to it that it's this felt sense of aliveness. It's asking what is pulling us towards connection, towards creativity, towards the sense of embodiment. And ultimately, it's tied to our motivation systems. If we want to just bring it back to a purely psychological level, they're called approach behaviors in psychology. And desire lives at the intersection of attachment, of affect, and identity. So we're
Mhm.
constantly creating ourselves in the presence of the other. And through desire, we can ask, what is it that I'm longing for? And what brings me into vitality? Because desire, at the end of the day, is a need that hasn't been met. And I love the relational aspect to it because even if that object of desire is solitude, it's me saying, I need some space here. That's
Yeah.
still something within a relational context, right? So desire is not just an urge. We can look at it more as this greater compass for meaning and direction in our lives.
Yeah. Beautifully put, Aubrey. Beautifully put. And also, because we are so much conditioned right from the childhood. Then we have our ancestral data within us, all the generational info, everything like locked into us. All Do our desires get shaped by our subconscious data, or what we see or what we have been experiencing through, or is it something else that shapes all those desires?
Absolutely. Fantastic question. And I think this brings us to attachment theory, which has a lot going on in pop psychology. And people tend to treat attachment styles as a death sentence of if you're anxious forever. If you are avoidant, you are avoidant forever. And don't get me wrong, aspects such as generational trauma, our
Mm,
histories, our attachment styles formed in early childhood are
mm,
largely influential to how we move about our adult relationships. However, it's something that we can see as data, as a starting point on how we want to move forward in our connections, rather than something that we feel has to trap us into a certain style of relating forever and ever. So I like to say attachment is the blueprint for how we pursue closeness and how we learn to regulate our own anxieties that come up relationally. So, especially in childhood, if we were met with attunement and responsiveness, we may feel freer to desire later in lives because it's we have that inherent belief that has been ingrained in us that it is safe to want. But if that was met with withdrawal, with punishment, with inconsistency, it's very easy to suppress that desire or intellectualize it, or maybe act on it in ways that feel disconnected to our deeper sense of self. So, desire can be this space where it's an attachment event. It's not simply just about that erotic energy, it's also how safe we feel to show up in that longing.
mm, that makes sense. Makes sense. When we interpret this in the context of conversations around pleasure with our partners, you explored the idea that desire itself is not just about what we want, but it's kind of a way to become alive. So how exactly could the discussion shift uh, around this idea in context of the pleasure with our partners?
Mhm. I think something, that is commonly misunderstood about desire is that it has to be created in the absence of safety, that it requires complete newness and new experiences. And there is absolutely a component of that to desire, of newness, of coming alive, of finding yourself in ways that you previously were not able to, either because it's an experience you haven't had or because it's something that you were told to not want. But there's also an element of relational safety that is required for these experiences to happen. Because when it comes to intimate experiences, our brain is full of brakes and accelerators. And we have to be in a situation where we feel like we can lower the brakes to allow the accelerators to rise. So that comes down to relational safety. And this is an embodied sense. It is not something that is purely language. Oftentimes, the body processes things long before the brain does. And so, relational safety means I can bring my full self, emotionally, physically, even into that erotic realm, into connection without being shamed, without being punished or abandoned. And so this is grounded in the principle of mutual attunement. And this is what comes into that dynamic with a partner. This is the ability to notice, to respond, and to repair with each other. Because let me be very clear about one thing. You are never going to have a purely sunshine and rainbows, pure state
Right.
of a relationship. There will inevitably be rupture. And that's okay. That is the in those moments, that's where we can experience the greatest connection of saying, "Hey, we're both human here. We are going to mess up. How are we going to work together to repair this?" And so in those moments, it shows I don't have to perform desire. I don't have to suppress it. I can explore it honestly. And like I said, this safety isn't static. This isn't a permanent state that you can spend your entire life in. It's a practice. And it's a practice that we put into place in moments of rupture. And it's also what makes sustainable intimacy possible. It's not just through comfort, it's through the depth of connection.
Mm. And one thing which you mentioned is, that the body senses safety before the mind catches up. I think this is so refreshing and profound because um, from my own personal experiences, sometimes my body tells me, when I can soften even before I consciously recognize it or my mind registers it. But I wonder how many of us override kind of all these, cues or signals from our body.
Yeah.
So that is quite a reflective perspective. And another area of your research is kink, which is as a conscious framework for trust, which I absolutely find fascinating. So, how can kink spaces cultivate deeper relational safety? That sometimes even the um, sunshine and evergreen vanilla relationships they struggle to achieve.
Yeah, kink offers a very powerful framework for intentionality and negotiation. It is also built entirely on trust because
Mhm,
within a kink dynamic, if that's something that someone is exploring with a partner, it externalizes the power, the vulnerability, and the control that are already all present in a relationship, but you're exploring it on a new level. So, from a psychological perspective, kink can
mhm,
be a space for integration. It's where someone can bring forward parts of themselves that they were either taught to hide, they were suppressing, and offer them recognition and care. And this can look a lot of different ways, right?
mhm,
It's it reflects a lot of the principles that we discussed that come up in relational safety. So what are those clear boundaries? What does repair look like? What does someone need to feel cared and loved for, and building that mutual awareness? And so it's this form of intimacy that requires deep trust and deep understanding. And also someone saying, I understand your needs and I am learning to anticipate them. And it's truly
mhm,
a dance between the people involved of gaining a deeper understanding of needs, wants, and desires.
mm. Yeah, because some might argue that kink um, kind of introduces that risk or instability into relationships. So how would you respond to that kind of skepticism or concern in there?
I would affirm it. I would say you're right. There are absolutely practices in it that inherently, surface value, are not safe. And so that comes to what are your boundaries? What are your limitations? What are things that you want to explore and feel safe enough to do so in this partnership? Part of my work and my research is interviewing people and professionals in the kink and BDSM space. And something that has come up over and over and over again is that trust is not assumed. Trust is never assumed. It's negotiated and it's reaffirmed through clear communication, through mutual respect, and through deep attunement. Because every single day, we show up differently. We have
Yeah.
different experiences. We interact with different people. We might be in wildly different headspaces than when we initially met someone, right? So,
Mhm.
in kink dynamics, especially with some of these professionals that I'm interviewing, there is a high and extremely refined level of intentionality where roles are defined, limits are discussed, and it's also this constant back and forth of reading what someone needs in the moment. And it becomes ritualized in a sense that this creates a framework in which, first of all, vulnerability becomes possible, but it's not strictly about control and it certainly is not about certainty.
Mhm.
These moments are based purely on responsiveness, and it's
Mhm.
about the willingness to see someone fully, to hold their complexity, to remain in an ethical relationship with their experience and finding out what that looks like. And that's true across all relational structures, but I think kink is a fascinating lens to look at that and explore it.
Yeah. No, I never looked at kink from this perspective, Aubrey. I'll be very honest. And are there any cultural nuances also in there?
Oh, absolutely. It is
Okay.
purely on, a person by person level. And inherently in our most intimate relationships, we bring in the cultural influences, the values, the morals, the ideas of sexuality and sensuality that we were raised with. And that hugely influences how our desires are shaped, how they're negotiated, and how we show up intimately and how we view ourselves. And so that will have a huge role in playing out, first of all, our ability to trust and understand what that even looks like, what someone's needs are in those contexts, but also how we go about creating that closeness and safety with the other.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I agree. That makes sense. And I'll also circle back to the discussion around your research around you know, since you have spoken to so many therapists and folks and dominatrixes in kind of non-traditional dynamics. So there's a belief that, as you mentioned, that trust cannot be assumed. It is more through negotiation, communication, or agreements. So is trust like a cognitive process there, or it is something very carefully crafted between the two partners? I mean, how does your research challenge it, or it doesn't?
Fantastic question, because something I'm actually diving pretty deep into now is specifically the ethics of care and trust. And the summary of it is there is not a black and white set of standards that can be applied to relational trust. Carol Gilligan, she's a feminist philosopher who developed kind of this ethics of care, this framework. How can we look at what it takes to build trust and responsiveness within partnership? And she says that we need to prioritize responsiveness over rigid principles. So, in building trust, it asks not what is right or the, objective moral high ground answer in this context, but it's asking what's needed in this relationship, what is needed in this moment. And it's the willingness to hear and be moved by the other person's experience without abandoning yourself and your own needs. And so when we apply this to desire or intimate partnerships, this really means staying attuned to the emotional ecology of the connection. So it's saying how it might be something to the effect of how are we negotiating need? How are we negotiating power? How are we speaking about vulnerability? But it's not an individual pursuit, it's a relational practice. And when we put the ethics of care into play, it's truly built on this mutual listening and care that we can continue to work on throughout the duration of could be a single partnership, but it absolutely applies to really any relationship through the duration of our lives.
Hmm. And as I mentioned about relational safety and this, emotional connection, how does somatic awareness? What kind of role does it play into, uh, uh, you know, kind of bringing that awareness into our body about relational safety or establishing that emotional connection?
The majority of what I research is pointing towards encouraging people to listen to our bodies so much more than we currently are. Because pursuing desire without safety or that felt physical sense of safety often leads to disconnection, of course, not from others, but ultimately from ourselves. And so when we don't have those check ins with our bodies, we might override our boundaries. We might confuse intensity for intimacy. And if that's not the experience that someone wants or is actively consenting to, that can cause both the body and the mind to shut down entirely. So this is somatic dissociation. This is when we're engaging in either erotic or emotional experiences, but you can frame it as the body is not fully online, right? It's not completely present in that experience. And so without that safety, that's when desire becomes performative. But when safety is introduced into the equation, that's when it's transformative. So the difference is whether we feel empowered to be fully present in our wanting. And when that's there, the body is able to completely respond. But when it's not, those sensations of tightness in the chest or that overwhelming feeling that sometimes is processed physically before you're even able to put an emotional label on it, of something telling you this is just not right. And we have to listen to that when that comes up because that is the body telling the mind that this situation is not promoting the relational safety that that person needs in that moment. And that's data that we can do something with, but that's hugely important when we think about how we are shaping our identity, both intimately, but just as a sense of self.
Hmm. Hmm. Oh, okay. That's really deep.
It's heavy, I know.
Yeah, yes. And I don't know, maybe this question might not have the relevance here, but um, do you think the your research may give some valuable insights based on generations as well, because the definitions of relationships, they happen keep on keeping on changing, from time to time.
Mhm.
For boomers it was something, for us millennials it's something, then for Gen Z's, for Gen Alpha, although I mean, I'm not just saying that okay, these only are the generational types, but that's what in the popular culture we keep on listening, hearing. So do you think there are changes in the definitions or the outlook towards emotional connection, relational safety that we are seeing, or probably in the future it might be different?
I love this question because the cultural or even just present view on how we view relationships influences so much in how we feel like we are able to interact with our desires or
Mm,
not. And like you said, there are so many vast changes constantly happening, and either freedom and privileges to relate in a certain way or to not. A lot of these are cultural scripts. A lot of these have to do with values or norms that we grew up with. And so it's a good reminder that relational norms are not neutral, they are constructed, right? It invites us to question not just how we connect, but even why are certain forms of connection privileged over others?
mm,
And just taking a look at those scripts, maybe they're the ones that we grew up with, maybe they're the ones that we're currently acting out now, and not shaming them or feeling a need to contradict them, but just examining them and asking yourselves, is this truly serving me?
mm,
And in terms of safety, this really helps us see how our bodies, even our identities, have been policed in certain ways, and
mm,
how healing relationally involves creating new scripts. It can mean creating new roles and ways of being in relationship. So, especially for people, maybe in a non traditional dynamic, safety might not be found by returning to the norm, whatever that might be, but it's found by co authoring. And in that process, if that's something that serves you, it can lead you towards something that's more honest, more attuned, and more expansive.
yeah. Oh, okay. And any simple practice you may have come across, or with you think that could help people become more attuned to their body signals in moments of intimacy?
Definitely. I think something as simple as slowing down is so important. And
Mhm.
this can be, it can be an incredibly intimate act that can have nothing to do with sex, but it's simply taking a moment to pause, to check
Mhm.
in, to ask yourself, what is it that I want here? Because desire, it doesn't respond to pressure, it responds to presence. And from a purely somatic lens, this might look like tuning into the body's subtle signals. Even just feeling the warmth of someone else, the tension in the moment, the breath. We're able to reconnect to our desire not by forcing arousal, but by cultivating sensation. And so, emotionally, this can be something incredibly profound, but also incredibly heavy for a lot of people. And I want to take the space to acknowledge that because sometimes there almost is a component of grief to this. And I have never connected with myself in this way before. And it's grief for the parts of us that have learned to go quiet. And if people have that experience, I want them to know they are not alone. We all have parts of ourselves that we have been taught to suppress, to push down. And when we kind of welcome that part of ourselves into us, desire returns not as performance, but of truth. And so taking those moments to slow down, to check in, and to acknowledge where the body really is in this very moment, in this space, in this relational context can be deeply profound.
Really, really thoughtful. And I absolutely love the quote you mentioned that desire doesn't come under pressure, it comes with presence.
Mhm.
It's really, really beautiful and thoughtful. Oh, brilliant, brilliant, Aubrey. So before we wrap up, if our listeners would like to connect with you and explore more about your work and this whole world of exploring desires, relational safety, how does psychology, somatic awareness play their roles, respective roles here? What's the best way to do that?
Absolutely. You can head to my website, www.aubreyaust.com. Sign up for my newsletter. It's where I go a lot more deep into a lot of these insights sent out every month. And also follow me on Instagram at Aubrey underscore Aust to keep up with where my research is.
That is really, really lovely. I'll make sure to have all the links mentioned in the show notes. And um, Aubrey, thank you, thank you. I mean, I'm so grateful to you for bringing such depth and tenderness to this conversation, because I mistakenly said that, desire, trust, they are concepts, but they are not. They are living experiences that they shape how we show up in relationship with not only with others, but with ourselves. So thank you so much for bringing this depth.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the lovely and very insightful conversation.
So, to all my listeners, if this conversation has stirred something within you, take a moment to reflect, take a pause, and share it with someone you trust. And remember that pleasure is not just about feeling good, it's about feeling alive within and without. Until next time, this is your host, Sana, and this is Pleasure Principles. Thank you.